of interviewing Brian Armstrong. First of all, I want to thank you for being a visionary in this space. This is the biggest economic movement of my lifetime, and from a technology point of view, it is rivaling AI, but I think the institutional world does not quite understand that this movement is as big as that one, and there will be probably convergence at some moment in time. Yes.
Well, both crypto and AI go through these summers and winters, and so I keep hoping at some time we'll have a coordinated summer of AI and crypto at the same time, but we'll see.
That would be nice. So let's start with your long-term mission for Coinbase and for crypto generally, or digital assets, as we are saying more and more these days.
Yeah, well, we fundamentally see crypto as a technology to update the financial system. The financial system it's slow, it's expensive, there's unequal access around the world. And the mission of Coinbase is really to increase economic freedom in the world. And so we're really passionate about this idea of how do we create good financial infrastructure for people all over the world that enforces things like property rights and sound money and free trade. And the beauty is that smartphones are now so inexpensive. You can buy one for maybe $10, $20 anywhere in the world. The poorest people in the world now have smartphones. So if you have a smartphone and an internet connection, you can now have access to good financial infrastructure, property rights, the ability to earn a living, make a better life for yourself and your family. And that's a really powerful idea because economic freedom is kind of this underpinning of all progress, right? Like, more people are going to try to do good things for the world if they believe they can keep the upside of their labor.
Absolutely.
And America sort of takes us for granted sometimes because we're an anomaly historically, but many places in the world that's not the case. If you do manage to accumulate some wealth, it could be seized, confiscated from you, it could be devalued via inflation. And so if we're actually able to increase economic freedom globally, it would have an incredible outcome in terms of it'd bend the curve of progress for all humanity. So that's really what we're hoping to do with this technology.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're watching devaluations around the world, and they're pretty massive in big countries. Like in March, Egypt devalued by 40%. Can you imagine? 40%. Nigeria over the last year, 50%. Again, I think we're seeing a domino effect, much like the Asian crisis in the 90s, which people may or may not remember. So where do you think, or what do you think the biggest obstacles are right now for you to achieve your vision?
Well, in the US, probably the biggest obstacle is regulatory clarity.
Definitely.
Unfortunately, the US is a little behind on this. Europe has already passed comprehensive crypto legislation. We've seen most of the G20 is actually already drafting or has implemented crypto legislation. And so there's broadly this recognition that this technology is here to stay. It has incredible innovative potential. We need to make sure we prevent consumer harm, things that happened with other companies and everyone's aware of. And so the US, I just got back from DC, a couple days in DC. I met with 12 or 13 different members of the Senate. The Senate is very eager to move on legislation now after the House passed the FIT21 bill, the market structure bill, with strong bipartisan support. More than 2/3 of the House voted for it. And so the Senate now has a couple of bills being drafted that they're hopefully going to turn this into law, whether it's in this Congress later this year or the next Congress. So we've got a lot of work to do there, and it's important that America gets this right. In the absence of that clarity, I probably don't have to tell all of you, there has been a bit of this turf war between the CFTC and the SEC, the two federal regulators. Are these commodities? Are they securities? Our point of view is that the tokens, underlying assets are commodities. There could be an investment contract or something like that on top of it that is an actual security. Like if a company is going to raise money, that's a security. There should be a path to register those, broker-dealers that can trade them. And we'd like to work with the SEC to make that happen as well. But if we don't have Congress step in and act, the lack of clarity is just going to be weaponized and not allow the industry to thrive onshore.
And how about obstacles then in the rest of the world?
Mm-hmm.
What do you see? Is there a quicker take-up or embracing of this technology and these commodities around the world?
Well, there's about 10 markets around the world where Coinbase has set up local operations, and each of those has a slightly different story, right? Just to give you broad strokes. I mean, it's funny, in the UK and in Singapore, for instance, they don't have this issue that we have in the US of having a separate commodities and securities regulator. They just have one regulator. So for instance, the FCA in the UK, this is a total non-issue. The question about commodities and securities, it never comes up because they just have one federal regulator, so it's not politicized, right? And similarly in Singapore, that's the same issue. So each country has slightly different, moments in time. Like Rishi Sunak in the UK was incredibly pro-crypto, and that government is now probably changing over. So we have to sort of, at any given moment, there's somewhere in the world where we see a big opportunity. President Milei coming in Argentina, for instance, has been super pro-crypto, right? So we just, in the global landscape, we sort of see who's in office, who's going to lean in and work with us. We grow our business there, and then when the guards change, in who's in office, we get an opportunity a few years later, and we grow it there. So we have a very long-term point of view on this. Whether it happens in any given year or decade in a certain country, we know the trend is clear long-term.
Right, and then back here in the U.S. then, so individuals have been very focused on this space well before institutions, right? And have participated in the movement. Can you talk a little bit about, institutions, what you're seeing from an institutional point of view, and actually why the take-up is perhaps so slow?
Well, I think you're correct that retail did jump into this space a little sooner over the last decade. But I'd say in just the last year or two, we've seen an incredible amount of institutional adoption, and I feel like institutions are fully in it at this point.
Really?
I mean, we released some stats in this State of Crypto report that showed 56% of the Fortune 500 executives report their company is working on something on-chain in crypto, right? And so it's the biggest companies in the world. BlackRock is helping tokenize real-world assets. JP Morgan has an on-chain project called Onyx. Google Cloud is accepting crypto payments, St. Jude's Hospital, and then fintechs like Stripe and PayPal, they're adding stablecoin support. So 56% of the Fortune 500 is doing something. I think this is really here to stay. It's already happening amongst institutions. And Coinbase can play a big role there too. Our Coinbase Prime product is the most successful in the institutional space, and we've got about a third of the top 100 hedge funds, our clients. A lot of them are also looking for that regulatory clarity moment, and I think when I talk to the institutional investors often, they'll say, once we feel like there's regulatory clarity, which will not be some moment in time, it's a gradual trend that's happening, they're like, that's what would cause us to put 5-10% of our portfolio in instead of a couple of percent.
So that's interesting, our different perceptions, because having just launched the Spot Bitcoin ETF, what we've seen is none of the major platforms have approved it yet. So the flows we've seen, and they've been great, have either been just from retail or they've been donated by Grayscale. A lot of it was donated by Grayscale, but we're still waiting for an approval, even from the platforms that do tend to approve new, interesting, different financial instruments. They're waiting, and maybe all this is we need one, and then there'll be a very rapid adoption, because competitively it's going to be very important to have this new asset class, we believe, on platforms.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think you could argue we haven't really seen the real inflows happen even in ETFs, and they've already been really good. I mean, from the numbers I've seen, there's far more demand in ETFs than is being mined every day from Bitcoin, for instance, which is a positive indicator. But you're right. I think Morgan Stanley, UBS, some of these firms, they haven't really enabled the ETFs where we'll see even larger inflows in the future potentially. I don't know why that is, but the ETFs actually is an area where we did get regulatory clarity. So this will happen in bits and pieces, and I think it's an incredible first step.
Yes, and then let's get into products, Coinbase's products. Which are the most exciting products to you these days?
Yeah, well, the first one is really a technology improvement that'll enable lots of products, but if any of you haven't seen Base, It's our layer 2 solution. It's really important to help blockchains scale. And so, layer 1 networks were the first thing that happened in crypto. They were kind of slow, they were kind of expensive, but you could see the potential of it. With layer 2 coming online, it's kind of like when the internet moved from dial-up to broadband. It's actually enabling things like you can now send USD coin instantly anywhere in the world for free. And that's a game changer for things like payments and remittance and all kinds of things that just reduce friction in the economy. So that's one. Derivatives is another thing. We now have our derivatives products live both in the US under our FCM and internationally and our international exchange. That's an important part of any sort of capital market, and we've seen really good traction there. The last one I'd say is we released something called our Smart Wallet. So this one it's a little bit technical still, but a lot of developers have started to use it. And it essentially makes the onboarding process for someone to get a crypto wallet in any kind of application much easier. It's using things like biometrics. So, in the past, you had to remember this 12-word phrase, and you had to save it in a password manager, and sometimes people would, put it in the wrong spot, and they would lose it. Now you can really just use a biometric like a fingerprint, and boom, you have a crypto wallet in any application. And so we're starting to see crypto wallets get added into lots of different Web 2 companies, lots of Web 3 companies that are kind of native on chain. And really, what we're seeing just zooming out here is like crypto started as an asset class that people wanted to invest in, and it's great. It's more than $1 trillion, and we've got over 400 million people globally, have used crypto now, about 5% of the global population. We're now starting to see it go from an asset class to real-world utility. Payments and voting and decentralized social and having a direct relationship with content creators and their fans, and all these kind of things are now coming online. And so that's how we get it to be 1 billion people or more using this. And it's following kind of a similar adoption curve as the early internet.
Yeah, it's been interesting to do our own research on how many steps of the transaction process crypto is going to reduce. The number of steps just for a transaction to be authorized in the traditional world is 9 steps. And then transaction settlement, I think, is another 6 steps beyond that. And each one of those is a fee, a toll. But when you're talking instantaneous, peer-to-peer, that all collapses. That tax goes away. So I think people are going to get it. There's a lot of frustration with that fee, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, sometimes people ask me, well, shouldn't Coinbase, why are you interested in DeFi and self-custodial wallets? Wouldn't you want everybody to just have their funds on your platform? And I think centralized exchanges and everything are going to be great for a long, long time. But the real potential and innovation here comes from these peer-to-peer transactions. How do we eliminate intermediaries? And crypto really kind of makes a lot of those intermediaries unnecessary, because if you can do instant settlement, you don't have to have an intermediary with some sort of risk that is introduced with intraday settlement. If it's just real-time settled, you can cut out the middlemen, you can reduce friction in the economy. And it's important for that to happen on-chain. Coinbase is moving more and more of our products on-chain. We're trying to play in that space with self-custodial wallets, with DeFi, to make sure that we enable the true innovation potential. Because now it goes from just being an asset class that 10% of the world wants to invest in or so, to being something that billions of people, the majority of people in the world, can benefit from. I mean, crypto should really be powering a larger and larger percentage of global GDP over time, because they're just more efficient rails. Why wouldn't, payments are like water flowing to the path of least resistance. Why wouldn't more and more of it happen over time? So my hope is that, in 10 years we'll be sitting here and 25% of global GDP is happening on crypto rails.
Yeah, and all of those steps that I described and the toll takers, it is all about risk mitigation, and it's it's just a kludgy system instead of a layer on the internet that developers did not build in the early 90s because we had no idea that financial services and commerce were going to take place on the internet, right? Yeah, so Well, you certainly, Coinbase has, the wind in its sails right now. The stock has done very well. I remember last year it was terrorized by the SEC at different points until, the judicial system basically called the SEC out. So very happy about that. I'd like to know, how do you keep that momentum going? How in terms of course, we're an investor in the stock, but the company in the stock, and how do you keep it going? And what do you worry about now that you're seeing such good breakthroughs on the regulatory and political front here in the United States? What now is keeping you up?
Yeah, well, we really want the company to be successful in any sort of market environment, adjusted EBITDA positive in any market environment. So we've done a good job of shifting our revenue. 3 or 4 years ago, it was like 95% trading fees, right? Which can be quite volatile depending on if there's lots of volume or not that quarter. We've now shifted it to be more and more subscription and services revenue, which is more predictable, and that's allowed us to make it be, it allows us to plan the business over more time, with more predictability. I think we've been able to reduce costs quite a lot, be very judicial about how we're growing the expense base, but still invest in the next iterations from an innovation point of view, like the smart wallet and Base, and how do we accept commerce payments online? How do we accept political donations in crypto? How do we inject it into more and more parts of the crypto economy? The other big piece of the puzzle is international expansion. So obviously we started in the US, still our largest market, but we've now picked 10 large markets. We call this our Go Deep markets, where we have these local boots on the ground, local licenses, local partners, and we've started to make great traction. Actually, international in Q1 our revenue grew faster than in the US. And so we've started to make that a bigger and bigger percentage of our market in those 10, or our revenue in those 10 Go Deep markets. We also have what we call our Go Broad strategy, which is with self-custodial wallets, we can enter into the long tail of countries, some of the big emerging markets, with self-custodial wallets. Coinbase Wallet is our product there. So we go deep, we go broad, depending on how mature the market is, the regulatory structure there, and that's been a good strategy for international expansion.
Yeah, we've been surprised at how quickly international has scaled. I think it's 17% of your revenues right now. And starting with derivatives, right? That really gave you the big push. I'd like to ask, in terms of, and you described earlier how you're working with many financial institutions, but you're also going to disintermediate some of their business. So can you talk about that dynamic? I thought that there would be a lot more pushback, and then of course BlackRock's decision to partner with you at a time when we didn't even know BlackRock was friendly to crypto, I think, or they had just turned friendly. So this dynamic between, the traditional financial institutions that are going to see some of their businesses disintermediated, certainly in the traditional banking world, I suppose. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the smartest institutions out there, they recognize that, they're all innovators as well. They need to stay on the forefront of this. And so they're recognizing the potential in this technology. And many of them, like we discussed, they're leaning into it. They're saying, hey, we're not going to sit around and wait for something to disrupt. We want to be a part of that disruption. And so that's just the nature of business. You always need to be disrupting yourself, or someone will do it for you. And so Coinbase, actually, it's great in financial services. It's pretty common where, you might technically be competitors on one product, but you're a customer of the other product. And so we're all kind of pretty collaborative in that regard. Coinbase has a developer platform called CDP, Coinbase Developer Platform. And a lot of the core primitives that we've built, which help do custody and trading and integrating into all these blockchains, we've made those APIs that we use internally available to third parties externally, just like Amazon did with AWS. And so I think a lot of institutions are going to have an opportunity to use those if they want. It's a way for Coinbase to participate in the value chain, but also help every business in the world come on chain. And of course, if they don't want to use our platform, they can build their own. That's sort of the beauty of it. But hopefully our tools are good, and that'll allow us to participate in their success as well.
So they're looking at this as a way to increase their own productivity, streamline their own costs. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, each institution is different, but for instance, banks pay enormous fees to SWIFT. They don't feel that it's a very efficient system. Now, the process by these, there's a lot of inertia, right? There's a lot of people in the United States who still pay their rent every month with a paper check. Yeah. So sometimes these changes take a little while. It's a demographic shift too, right? It's a generational thing that we're seeing. But there's a whole group of young people who are growing up today where, they're never going to have a bank account in the traditional sense with like a branch on the corner and a checkbook. Their phone is their wallet. They just want to have a primary financial account where they get paid and they can pay for things and they can just transact in a global economy. And I think increasingly they're going to use things like, there's mobile money apps, but I think crypto is a way for this younger generation to participate in something that they perceive as being more fair, more free, more global. And for many of them, they just feel like the system doesn't really work for them, the traditional system, and they want to participate in this new system. So my hope is that Coinbase can be the primary financial account for actually a next generation of people growing up.
Yeah, it's interesting. At ARC, we're trying to figure out who are going to be the winners in the digital wallet space, because it is a winner-take-most opportunity. That's why I ask you about the banks and the competition. This truly is a winner-take-most. If we use WeChat Pay as a model, that was a bank branch in the pocket. It was all kinds of financial services and commerce on it as well. So that is why I asked the question. I think the competitive dynamic is going to be very interesting. We have in our portfolio certainly Coinbase, and then Cash App is going via Bitcoin into the rest of the world, Robinhood a different way, and so forth. But we don't have any traditional banks. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. We want people obviously to be using Coinbase app, but I think there's one difference between that and WeChat Pay, which is that the crypto protocols are open networks.
Yes.
Right? And so the interoperability is actually a key feature where, if someone is using Coinbase on one end of the transaction and they're using another app elsewhere, it should really work. Now, crypto needs to get a little better at some of these common standards. There's a lot of fragmentation. Just like in any industry, it starts off with lots of ideas, and I think it'll consolidate down over time. But the interoperability is part of the strength of the crypto network. It's not like I have a PayPal account, you have to have a PayPal account. Well, that's hard to get really global adoption of that. Right. But if we each have a crypto account and you're using a local app made in Venezuela or Nigeria, it should work with the Coinbase app as an open standard.
Okay, so do you disagree then that it's a winner-take-most opportunity?
I mean, look, I think you could say it's winner-take-most in each market. You could say, email is maybe a good example because email is an open protocol too, but Gmail works better if you also use G Suite, right? Like Google Calendar and Google Docs. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for companies like ours to compete and build good products, but ultimately the switching cost is a bit lower, which makes our job harder, but I think it's better for the consumer, and that's what'll actually cause it to win. Like a lot of people have tried to think about how might you attack like the Visa monopoly or duopoly with MasterCard or something. And by the way, I think they're actually going to be leveraging stablecoins layer 2. So they're smart companies. But if it's like, Coinbase versus Visa, it's like we're probably not going to break into that space. But if it's an open standard, a global open decentralized protocol, kind of like the internet or something, I could see that disrupting like an incumbent. So it makes each individual company's job harder, but it's also the most powerful thing about it that allows it to become a global standard.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, on to the election. Right? I mean, it's been quite exciting and you've been key, I think, to spurring this movement. So thank you, Coinbase, for bringing us all along, leading the effort in Washington. So maybe can you talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington, or the political dynamic? It just seems to have turned so suddenly. We had FTX in 2022, and everybody said, okay, that's it. this is never going to work. No politician is going to sign on to this. It's just fraudulent and all of that. And at the time, I was saying, no, wait a minute. This proves the concept. Sam Bankman-Fried didn't like Bitcoin. He didn't like decentralization, didn't like transparency. So I think that is where the wind has shifted. And certainly in the legislative world, as you mentioned earlier, we're seeing big surprises in terms of, I would say, conversions. We thought this was going to be a one-party issue. It seemed like that at one point, but that has changed. Why do you think it changed?
Yeah, well, I think the core reason is that DC has realized this is a massive voter base in the US. And that's what's really started to make it a bipartisan issue. There's 52 million Americans who've used crypto. We helped fund this C4 called standwithcrypto.org. And they've now had 1.1 million Americans, voters, raise their hand and say, we really care about this issue. We want to elect pro-crypto candidates. That's gotten a lot of people's attention in DC. In some of the early primary races, there were some anti-crypto candidates that were expected to win and they lost, right? And I know that got a lot of people's attention in DC. And so we're now in an environment where there are strong crypto advocates on both sides of the aisle. We saw recently, for instance, in the House of Representatives, this FIT21 bill I mentioned, got more than 2/3 of the House to vote for it. So there's clearly a political will that we need clear rules in the US. The current situation is untenable. And in DC, I met with the 12, 13 different senators over the last few days. There's bills going back and forth, being drafted. There's a lot of urgency from Senate leadership to say, how do we get this done? Now, the legislation's complicated. The stars have to align. Anytime you go and try to attempt one of these things, you can never say if it's for sure or not. But I can tell you, this is one of the only bipartisan issues happening in Congress right now. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, the Congress really has been only in a place where they're doing must-pass bills. There's not a lot of collaboration on bipartisan work. And I would say crypto is the #1 bipartisan issue. It's kind of like the only thing that they're coming together to work on right now. So that's really encouraging. It's really the voters that are in a democracy that are going to elect candidates which represent their values. And I think DC is waking up to that.
Yeah, and I think it's very important for the young vote, and they're waking up to that. Very much so. How has your own user base? Have you seen them writing in to Washington to really help change minds?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually helped invite a bunch of founders to go to DC. Many of these representatives, they haven't really ever met someone in the crypto space, right? And they don't realize that, for instance, in Ohio, there's dozens of crypto entrepreneurs trying to build things in their state. And there's sort of, it's just like anything, it's a relationship. Relationships matter, right? If you're just seeing something on the internet, you don't really know if it's real. These founders are incredibly compelling in person to go meet with the representative and say, I care about this, and I'm in your district, and this is an important issue to me. We got to get this fixed, and there's just no substitute for that. So crypto is finally getting organized politically, yeah. And it's such a massive constituent of customers, shareholders, employees. They deserve to have their views represented in our government. If you haven't signed up, sign up at standwithcrypto.org.
Yeah, well, former President Trump accepting donations, campaign contributions in crypto, supportive of the right to self-custody, and will guarantee his attempts to preserve that right. And then mining, he wants to bring it to America, make it happen, the rest of the Bitcoin mined, make it happen in America. So he's certainly captured this wave, and I think it's he's considered very divisive, of course, by some people, but half of the population did vote for him, and I think he's educating those who haven't taken a close look at what this movement is all about. I think it's a good thing, just the bipartisan nature of this.
Yeah, both parties are recognizing they need to address this issue,
yes.
and I think it's going to be actually one of the top issues like in this election. So
yes.
Crypto's arrived.
It's arrived. It's arrived. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you're doing to make this new world happen.
Thank you, Kathy.